My name is Joshua Johnson. I bring you greetings from your neighbors right across the street at KQED Incorporated. They were really happy to have me here as a part of this event. We love getting out in the community and talking about all these issues. The same issues that we're going to discuss tonight, I guarantee you, have been super hot topics in the newsroom for like the last 6 to 8 months. Our new head of news, Holly Kernan, has been beating this drum for a while, and the conversation hasn't really stopped. And I'll talk more about where we're taking that in the future. But this is something that is definitely top of mind, and I can tell you that there's real seriousness inside of our organization about improving our diversity, diversifying our sound, covering communities that we're not really in. There's a lot of ambition about that right now. Before I get into what I do, and I'm going to try to talk as little as possible. I work in radio, so that's hard. I want to make an analogy that guides my coverage. It's an analogy I take from physics. Physics teaches us that everything that generates light creates at least a little heat, but not everything that creates heat creates light. This is why even the most energy-efficient bulb will be warm to the touch, but boiling water does not glow. Not everything that makes heat makes light. I believe it's the same with journalism. Every story that makes you upset or makes you angry or makes you feel something generates heat, but it doesn't often create understanding, and it doesn't often create knowledge. But every story that is well told that generates knowledge makes you feel something. Even if it's just that feeling of, oh, I get it now. That's an emotional reaction. And part of the challenge we have in public media is sucking the heat out of a story and only focusing on light. The problem is that that changes the story. Because if a situation is heated and you take the heat out of it, you've changed the story. So part of my job at KQED is to try to have heat and light, to keep them both in there. Understanding the medium that I'm working in, so it's not going to be quite as boisterous as, Fox 2 News. It's going to be a little different. But still giving people a slice of life into the way people actually live, in a way that is mostly light, but that does not ignore the heat, if that makes sense. One of the stories I did was ultimately aired on the PBS NewsHour. We did a piece as part of a Corporation for Public Broadcasting initiative called American Graduate, about the dropout crisis. Yes, Gwen Eiffel. I love Gwen Eiffel. She's cool. She's cool. We did a story about a program out of Oakland Unified to help black boys graduate high school. It's their manhood development program. We received some CPB money because we were part of the American Graduate Program. Jill Tucker, who's the education reporter for the San Francisco Chronicle, did a piece on this as part of her series Even Odds. And so we did a 30-minute special on KQED where I presented my story, and then we did a panel discussion about this, and then we did a community event in Oakland, actually at the BART headquarters building, with a big town hall audience. This story is about 9 minutes long. I edited it down just to the first few minutes, but this will give you an idea of what aired nationally on the PBS NewsHour.
It's a new school year in most parts of the country, a good time to explore the important ideas being discussed and debated in education. We start our series with a report from Oakland, California, on a different approach to the dropout problem, where young black men are more likely to miss school, get suspended, or end up in jail than other students, statistics that have alarmed school officials. Our story from special correspondent Joshua Johnson was produced by our colleagues at KQED in partnership with the San Francisco Chronicle. It's part of the American Graduate Project, a public media initiative about the dropout crisis.
Good morning, sir. How you doing? Good.
Sisway Abaka teaches the Manhood Development class at Oakland's Skyline High School.
Glad you could be here with us, brother. Good morning.
He and about a dozen African-American male teachers are focused on making sure that black boys graduate high school.
Take a step back. Y'all mate. We're trying to make transformations. A lot of our brothers are failing disproportionately. Like if we look at the statistics in Oakland, we're the highest in everything we don't need to be in. Give yourself some space.
You'll see higher rates of dropout, lower rates of graduation, higher rates of chronic absence, higher rates of suspension.
Junius Williams is CEO of the Urban Strategies Council, an Oakland-based nonprofit working to eliminate persistent poverty. In 2010, the council partnered with the Oakland School District to develop solutions for improving academic and social outcomes for black boys. The result was the Office of African American Male Achievement. Chris Chapman is the executive director.
One of the strategies with our manhood development classes and just getting eye level with the youth is how do we put kind of the swag in education and learning.
One challenge to restoring that swag, that swaggering sense of cool, was getting boys motivated to even show up to school.
What we found was that if kids weren't excited about being in school and they weren't engaged and being encouraged, actually then they would get turned on to the streets.
Skyline is one of 8 high schools and 3 middle schools in Oakland that offer the manhood development class.
How you feeling, brother?
Students come from varying academic, economic, and family backgrounds.
Define manhood for me. In the context of this program, what does it mean to be a man?
I just want brothers to embrace all aspects of manhood, not just so much the strength, but the compassion, the love, aspects of fatherhood, aspects of husbandhood, aspects of brotherhood. Ready? One.
Every day, Abaka, also known as Brother Siswe, leads the boys in exercise. It focuses their minds so that they can become better students.
And my major concern is a lot of our brothers don't know how to receive information. They don't know how to take notes. They don't know how to just sit down, some of them. A lot of our brothers need fathers, just period. I don't know it what other way I could put it.
In elementary school, a lot of the teachers used to tell me I'll never accomplish anything. And I was actually one of the smartest kids in my class. So
Abaka says sometimes the class feels more like therapy.
We might have to deal with a brother that lost a cousin or a brother that might be having a baby next week.
Students built altars to honor fallen classmates and other victims of gun violence, stark reminders of the trauma many carry into the classroom.
I grew up on 94th. That was a bad area. A lot of killings happened.
Wesley Brownlee, a 15-year-old freshman, is a student in the manhood class. When he graduated from middle school, he had a 3.5 GPA. Once he started high school, it began to drop.
I've seen myself hanging out with kind of the wrong friends and all that, like into bad stuff.
Brother Wesley, how them grades?
They're looking good so far, but I just got to turn in a big history assignment, and I'm kind of late on it already.
Whatever support you need between myself, the youth center, tutoring on campus, it's time.
Before, all I was worried about was just sports. And now, like Brother Siswe, he made us dig deeper into school. If we don't have a good education, we might not get to that school we want, or we might not have that good job that we want when we get older.
All right, so that was the top of the story. That was what aired on PBS NewsHour and on KQED's This Week in Northern California, what is now KQED Newsroom. So this was a chance that we had to actually take people someplace that they might not usually go, which is part of, I think, the power of what we do in public media, is we can get into issues in places where you might not have access or know how to access them, and then give you just kind of a clean view, an unobstructed view of the way that another segment of the populace lives. Another one of our functions is to try to get into very heated issues and bring light to the heat. And one of the examples of that I took a little, that I really worked on, was surrounding the Trayvon Martin shooting. Trayvon Martin and I are from the same part of Florida, and I remember my mother calling me and telling me how crazy things were down there while all this was going on. She was like, be glad you're out in California, you don't want to be here right now. But we were trying to figure out some way to get into the story. And I kept thinking about stand your ground, the stand your ground law. Everybody in the news was like, stand your ground is so crazy, it's so crazy. And I thought, there's got to be something similar in California. What about the laws in California? So I did some digging and I looked into what the laws actually are about justifiable homicide in California, and it became a radio piece. This is a little wonky, it's a little bit of legalese, but hopefully it'll make sense by the time you finish hearing it.
From KQED News, I'm Joshua Johnson. Here's a hypothetical question for you. Would George Zimmerman, the man who killed Trayvon Martin, still have been acquitted if the shooting happened in California instead of Florida? Much has been made of Florida's controversial law on the justifiable use of force known as Stand Your Ground. That policy is not in California law, but a jury here can still find a shooter not guilty for standing his or her ground. Even if the shooter chased down the person who threatened them, this state can and has acquitted defendants on that basis. It's a little-known aspect of California jurisprudence that has been on the books for more than a century. Let's discuss it with Professor Rory Little of UC Hastings College of the Law. His expertise includes criminal law and procedure, and he is a member of the state Supreme Court committee that writes jury instructions. Professor Little, good morning.
Good morning.
Before we get to stand your ground, let's go over what California statutes do say about justifiable homicide. It's a different kind of policy called the Castle Doctrine. What is the Castle Doctrine?
Well, so the defense of self-defense is well recognized in California, and the Castle Doctrine has always said that there is no duty to retreat if you're in your home. Your home is your castle, and you don't have to retreat. So if you're confronted in your home, you can shoot or you can use deadly force.
Now, stand your ground appears in California's official instructions for juries in criminal cases. I'm looking at them. They are instruction number 505 on justifiable homicide, self-defense or defense of another, and instruction 506, justifiable homicide, defending against harm to person within home or on property. These are the guidelines that you would see a judge read the jury to guide their deliberations. What is California's standard?
Well, there's a California instruction that says, and I'll now quote it, a defendant is not required to retreat. He or she is entitled to stand his ground and defend himself or herself, and if reasonably necessary, pursue an assailant until danger of whatever has passed. This is so even if safety could have been achieved by retreating. That's the statement in the jury instruction. I'm not sure that there are cases that have ever stated it quite that broadly, and if you go back to the 1890s, you'll find cases that seem to say it a little more narrowly than that instruction.
Now, these instructions still seem very similar to Florida's law, even though they don't appear in the statutes. They appear in these jury instructions. Do they have the same effect, or is the effect practically somewhat different?
Well, the effect is the same depending on the facts, right? The problem with the Trayvon Martin case is we don't really know what the facts were. There's another aspect of California law, of course, that says self-defense is not available to a person who is the initial aggressor. So if you start the fight, then you can't claim self-defense. If that provision were to apply, George Zimmerman would have no defense.
How often is stand your ground a factor in California criminal cases? Can you think of a time recently when it's come up?
Well, I mean, stand your ground, yeah. Whenever there's self-defense, you can have this, is there a duty to retreat or not? You don't have a duty to retreat if you can't retreat with complete safety, for example. So in California, anytime self-defense is raised, this jury instruction will be trotted out and people will argue about the facts. It's really not that uncommon. It's surprising to people to hear that this might be the law in California. Whether it would apply to let George Zimmerman shoot Trayvon Martin, that's not just determined by law. It's also determined not just by facts. It's determined by the culture of the community. And I'd say that we live in a pretty different community here.
Now, you have an issue with this jury instruction, and you are on the committee that helps to craft these instructions. And your concern, as I understand it, has to do with that unsettled question regarding where the crime occurs. It kind of ties into that whole matter of the Castle Doctrine. What exactly is your concern?
Yeah, well, I wasn't on the committee when this instruction was drafted, and this instruction has not come in front of the committee since I've been on it. But there is this old case in 1897 called People v. Newcomer, where the California Supreme Court leaves open the question, would self-defense apply? Would there be a stand-your-ground defense if you were not in the home?
I'm sorry, did you say 1897?
1897.
Okay.
So over 100 years ago, the California Supreme Court said, no duty to retreat if you're in your home. We're going to leave open whether there's such a duty if you're outside of the home. That little leaving open has never been firmly answered by the California Supreme Court. They simply repeat the same broad language over and over again. So I'm not saying it's not the law. I'm saying this instruction could be written with a little more nuance if people wanted to go back to 1897.
All right, I'll stop it there. So that was basically the way that the segment went. Again, a little wonky, a little bit of legalese, but it's a chance to kind of break into the pure information about what the law actually says. This is one of the functions that we try to do as much as possible with heated issues, is figure out, well, what are the actual facts? What does the law really say? And in a conversation like the Trayvon Martin shooting, when it was so much emotion, that's part of where I think public media can shine, is being able to go, now that you've had a chance to vent, and now that you've calmed down a little bit, now that we have calmed down a little bit, let's just talk. Like, let's look this up. Let's see what is actually here, and then we'll keep talking. So in this way, we're able to keep the conversation going. Hopefully it's not a way of shutting down the conversation. Hopefully it's a way of making sure the conversation does not stop, because we keep adding to the conversation and giving people more to build from. However, I find that a lot of coverage about Black lives is very, very serious. And life is not all serious. So the news should not be all serious. If your newscast sounds like all the troubles of the world and you're like, oh my God, the world is just going hell in a handbasket, look what's on the news, you need to change the channel, because life is actually a beautiful, beautiful place. And one of the ways that we cover the others, and I just realized I only own one suit, apparently. This is why I work in radio, ladies and gentlemen. I only need one suit. One of the ways that we cover diversity and culture is through our arts coverage. KQED Arts is expanding very dramatically right now. And we're getting ready to launch a new project called KQED Main Stage, which is like a YouTube for Bay Area arts, basically. Awesome. Really, really cool stuff. I mean, you could just like fall into a YouTube rabbit hole looking at local artists and dancers and musicians, and we got a thing on there now with a tribute band to Sly and the Family Stone, and Anna Devere Smith is on there. There's this one ballet troupe that performs like on a cliffside, like they're rappelling and they're dancing at the same time. It's like, this is the coolest thing I've ever seen. So one of the things we do is arts coverage, and one of the people I got to interview is W. Kamau Bell, who was the host of a show on FX called Totally Biased. He's a Bay Area comedian, and he and I got to talk. I'll play you a little bit of this. It's only a few minutes long, but he and I could have gone on for like 2 hours. Like the minute we sat down together, I was like, my mother lied, I do have an older brother. I knew it was somebody else.
W. Kamau Bell, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
At what point did you first realize that race could be funny?
I think that's just been a part of my life. You know, as a black person in America, you have to sort of find humor in race or else you go crazy. So I think it's just always been a part of my household.
When did it become something accessible that you realized, oh, I can work with this, I can do something with this?
As a comic, I was just trying to do things that were funny, and I sort of went back and forth talking about race a lot, not at all, because it was always a difficult subject to sort of like get an audience to want to engage in a long form way. Like you could make individual jokes, I felt, or I could, but I couldn't get like long form pieces out. And so when I wrote the W. Kamau Bell Curve, Ending Racism in About an Hour, which I did every night, people really were able to sort of understand the context of what I was talking about, and then the jokes were hit harder.
Whenever we talk about racism, we usually focus on like level 5 racism. That's the scary racism. The racism we read about in the history books. The racism we see on the 11 o'clock news. We call that Texas racism. But what about all those other levels of racism? We never talk about those. Like level 1 racism. It happens every day, usually around the water cooler, at the Xerox machine, often while holding a latte. We call that Berkeley racism.
There's something about being the black guy with something to say that means something culturally that I don't know if you find that endearing or empowering or restrictive. How do you view that?
The minute you step on stage, your vessel determines a lot of what the audience expects from you. And then it's your job to either play into that or subvert it. And I think the more aware you are of what the audience expects of you, the more you can have fun playing with it. And so for me, like, you know, there is a cultural history of the black guy with something to say, but there's not really a cultural history of this big black guy with something to say.
Right.
And I think over time I learned how to do that. As Chris Rock said about me talking to somebody else, which I thought was a great way to put it, he's like, Kamau can express anger with a smile.
All right, so that's a piece of the W. Kamau Bell interview. I wish I could play the whole thing, but I'm running out of time. And I'm working radio, so I'm looking at the clock like, guess after 20 minutes, guess after 20 minutes. So that was kind of a chance that we had to just be silly and kind of be fun. I believe W. Kamau Bell was also on Forum with Michael Krasny, and Michael didn't get quite the same jokes. But that's okay. Michael does his thing and I do mine. So that was just a chance for us to kind of, we also talked about what it means to be a blurred, a black nerd. I'm not sure I like that word, but I had to throw it out for him, and he threw it back, and he was like, yeah, we're both blurred. Just tattoo it right there. So what's next for us? Our coverage on the Black Lives Matter movement is going to continue. I'm heading up a work group at KQED News to try to figure out where we're supposed to go. So if you have ideas, send them directly to me, and they will get to the executive editor. I can tell you authoritatively, our management is serious about not letting that story go, but we don't want to cover it like everyone else. And we want to cover it proactively, not reactively. Oh, another protest. We got to be dragged over to Oakland again. We want to be ahead of the story. We're also working on just diversifying our newsroom. We're hiring for a few positions right now, and we are actively engaging diverse communities to try to broaden the applicant pool. I go to the National Association of Black Journalists Convention every year on KQED's dime to help represent us to the rest of the media and to try to get more people of color to apply for jobs. This coming year, not this year but the year after, NABJ and the National Association of Hispanic Journalists will do their convention together in Washington, D.C. So we will hopefully have that presence as well. And then just our KQED arts coverage, reminding people that Black lives are not all about the struggle and the grind. Some of them are just about a good album by D'Angelo. And that's part of the Black experience too. It's about not being reductive about Black lives. It's about not reducing Black lives to the struggle. You know, my grandmother always said, if you have nothing to cry about, you have nothing to laugh about. But you have both. And if we don't tell both parts of the story, we haven't told the story well. That's the whole idea behind light versus heat. We need to give both if we want to give an accurate picture of the way that the Bay Area looks and how this community looks. We are so far from perfect on this. We think our work is very good. We want it to be truly great. And hopefully we're driving forward in that direction. Thanks for listening.